All right, so let's turn now to the topic of abortion. I understand you've done some pro-life volunteer efforts, but what is your, if you can put it in a couple minutes, what is your basic case against abortion?
Yeah, so I would say that first, your moral value depends on the kind of thing you are, not what you're able to do. Your moral value depends on your being a human person. And what science tells us is that there's overwhelming agreement on this point, from the moment of conception onwards.
Overwhelming agreement among
scientists, among embryologists, among biologists. Just look at the textbooks. So even somebody like Peter Singer concedes that the unborn are human persons. So even many pro-choice philosophers grant the humanity of the unborn. And really, if you look at the science, most people are surprised to know that it's not really a controversial point in science that the unborn are human beings from the moment of conception. Now, the debate is whether or not they're persons, right? Some people want to draw a distinction between human beings and persons. But I think your moral value consists in who you are, the kind of being you are, not what you're able to do. If you make this distinction between human beings and persons, then you run into this problem where personhood becomes a decreed property, right? If you want to say that, well, a person is a being who is self-aware, who can communicate, who can exercise the developed capacity to rational thought, well, then you run into these problems. Well, are you a person when you're asleep, right? Because you're not actually communicating, you're not actually thinking. Or what about when you're in a temporary coma, right? You're not actually reasoning, you're not actually communicating, you're not actually exercising your rational capacity. So your moral value depends on the kind of being you are, and science tells us that from the moment of conception, the unborn are human beings.
Can you summarize the evidence for that proposition that we are here, or that from the moment of conception, the fetus is a human being?
Sure. So the embryo from the earliest stages of development has the human genetic code, human chromosomes, human DNA, human parents. It has everything it needs to develop into a mature form of the kind of being it already is. All it needs is adequate time, nutrition, and a hospitable place to develop. Everything that's needed for its development in terms of its biology, its information, it's already there. It just needs to unfold the capacities that it already has. There's a reason why human embryos develop into humans and not dogs, cats, birds, lions, tigers, zebras, so on and so forth. A human embryo develops into a mature human being because the human embryo is already a human being, albeit immature, but it's a human being nonetheless. And so there is overwhelming agreement that the embryo is human. Now, the question is what gives us our value? And when it comes to that question, I already said that the view that your value depends on what you're able to do, what you're able to think of, how you're able to communicate, act, reason, so on and so forth. That has problems in that it can't account for the problem of temporary changes, right? Let's say I knock you out cold, completely cold. You don't have dreams or anything. Well, would it follow that when you're out cold, when you're unable to reason, when you're able to communicate, when you're unable to function like a person, would it follow that you lose your rights as a person? Well, no, that's absurd. There was a difference between being a person and functioning as a person. The unborn are persons with potential. They're not potential persons. And so the unborn should count as persons because they have everything they need to develop into a mature form of the kind of being they already are. And so
let's talk a little more about the distinction between humans and persons.
Cool. Yeah.
Because you don't like that distinction.
I don't like the distinction at all.
All right, so let's talk about that.
So Marianne Warren has an interesting paper in which she argues that if you're a person, you must exhibit at least one or two of 5 criteria she lists. These include self-awareness, communication, the ability to communicate, the ability to act freely, self-motivated activity, the presence of self-concepts, and something other. And Warren says something that has these things qualifies as a person. Something that doesn't have these things doesn't qualify as a person. But Warren's view runs into this problem of temporary changes, right? If I knock you out cold, you don't have any of these things, but surely you still retain your personhood. So here's how I like to think of it. Let's draw a circle, and let's call this circle the class of all persons. Within that circle, we can draw a smaller circle, and we can label that circle the class of or all humans. So all humans are persons, but there might be persons who are not humans, right? There might be intelligent alien species out there. There might, angels are persons. The persons of the Trinity are persons, but they're not humans. So all humans are persons, but not all persons are humans. So being human is sufficient for being a person. So as long as
it's not necessary.
But it's not necessary. We can have persons who are not humans. So the unborn, in virtue of being human, count as persons. And since it's wrong to kill a person, it's wrong to kill the unborn from the earliest moment of conception onwards. As soon as you have an embryo, it becomes wrong to kill it. And that's why abortion is wrong. The common sense case against abortion is rather straightforward. Many philosophers go through, various kinds of hoops to try to avoid the problem of temporary changes, but I don't think those hoops are fruitful paths to take.
Have you heard of Callan Miller's Prudential argument against abortion?
Yeah, so here's how I like to put it personally in terms of an analogy. So suppose you're hunting with a friend, right? And your friend says, I'll go out, set some traps, lay some bait, and you say, okay, well, that's cool. So a few minutes later, you hear rustling in the bushes, right? Now you don't know what that is. It could be your friend laying a trap or setting out bait, or it could be an animal. Do you shoot? Well, given that it could be your friend, it would be better to err on the side of caution. It would be reckless of you to go ahead and pull the trigger if you didn't have reasonable certainty that it wasn't your friend. And so likewise, we can say for abortion, even if we don't know whether or not the unborn are persons, it would still be better to err on the side of caution and not partake in abortion just because it would be reckless, just because we don't have certainty on this issue, and it'd be better not to engage in an action that could potentially take a life. I believe Callan uses the example of a demolition of a building in which you don't, there's a chance in which there might be a person inside and you don't know. It would be reckless to demolish the building.
Morally reckless. Yeah.
Morally reckless, yes.
Morally blameworthy, completely negligent. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Some people say that men cannot pontificate or give their opinion on the ethics of abortion. So apart from whether or not that's true, why do you think that people give this argument so often?
Yeah, I certainly think there's an optics issue here, right? It looks better if you have, say, a woman arguing against abortion because abortion is something that affects the woman. But to more generally, I'd say that whether or not somebody's a man or a woman, what matters is just the argument, the merits of the thing in question. The truth value of a position doesn't depend on the sex of an individual, right? Suppose I made an argument, a really compelling argument against abortion. Why should the fact that I am a man completely invalidate what I've just said? Well, it would be strange to say that.
It's a type of ad hominem.
Yeah, it would be strange to say that if you replaced me with a woman and a woman said the exact same thing I said, that somehow her being a woman makes her opinion more legitimate.
Or makes the argument sound.
Yeah, so arguments don't have genders or sexes, right? It's about whether or not something is true. And whether or not something is true is a matter of whether or not what you say corresponds to reality. And if it corresponds to reality, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman making it.
So you'd agree that there are no gender restrictions on the abortion debate?
Yeah, men absolutely. And it's kind of disingenuous to say that men have absolutely no say in the abortion debate. Because the unborn, half of the unborn comes from the man, from the male individual. So males have an interest in, fathers have rights too. It's not just the rights of the mother. And so in saying that abortion is just a woman's issue, well, hey, what about the rights of the father, right? So it's almost a kind of discrimination against men to say that men have no right. Well, of course men have rights to pontificate about abortion. They contributed half the genetic material for the unborn. So men have just as much a right as women to speak about abortion. And what's ironic is that this whole argument would undercut the legal justification for Roe v. Wade, right? Roe v. Wade was decided by 9 men. And if you want to say, well, men have nothing to say about abortion, well, I guess we should overturn Roe v. Wade because Roe v. Wade was decided by a group of men who didn't have the lived experiences of women.
If I had a microphone, I'd give it to you to drop right there. But okay, so related to the topic of abortion is the question of bodily autonomy. Mm-hmm. Like, doesn't the woman have the right to do whatever she wants with her body? And then what would you say with Thompson's famous violinist argument?
Yeah, so 2 things. First, the unborn isn't a part of the woman's body. And so it's not a matter of what she does to her own body. There's another individual in question. And even if
you said that this is uncontroversial,
what's
right? That this is a human person.
Oh, no, that it's a human being.
Yeah,
right?
It's a human being.
Yeah.
The unborn is a human being, the fetus, the zygote, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a human being, but it's not the woman. It's a different being.
Yeah. So it's not as if, we may grant for the sake of argument that women have the right to do whatever they want to their own body. I actually think that nobody has the right to do whatever they want to their own body. I think that's...
Which we already talked about.
Yeah, which we already talked about. But even if a woman did have a right to do whatever she wanted to her own body, the unborn isn't a part of her body. The unborn resides in her body, but it's not a part of her body, right? And so when it comes to decisions like, what can a woman do to her own body? Well, we also have to consider the rights and interests of a third party. Abortion isn't just, an issue involving the woman herself. It's something involving another party that's been created in an act of sex. And also, the man also has a role in this too. It's not just the woman as well. It's also the unborn and the man. Now, Judith Jarvis Thomson had a famous argument that challenged this. Thomson gave the example of a violinist who's hooked up to, I believe it was like a kidney dialysis machine or something like that. And the argument is that, well, surely the violinist has the right. I'm just summarizing the argument here, but the argument is surely that the violinist has the right to unplug from the machine because he doesn't have a duty to sustain the life, or the individual connected to the violinist has the right to unplug from the machine because he doesn't have the duty to sustain the violinist's life. Well, there's a number of things you could say about this. Frank Beckwith has, in his book Defending Life, he gives like 5 or 6 reasons why this is a terrible argument. One crucial point of this analogy is that the relationship between a mother and her child is different from the relationship between 2 strangers, right? Parents have special obligations to their children that strangers don't have special obligations to each other. So a mother has a special obligation to take care of her child that, whereas for 2 strangers, that might be what ethicists call an extraordinary duty. Whereas for women, a mother taking care of her child, it would be an ordinary duty. So there's for one, a disanalogy to be made there. Second, I would say that unplugging from the violinist is different from an abortion. In one case, you're withdrawing treatment. In another case, you're actually doing something that ends, you're actually performing an act of killing. Abortion isn't just withdrawing treatment. Abortion is the active going into a womb and ending the life of a unborn human. So it's not just withdrawing treatment; it's actually an active act of killing. So it's not the act of letting die; it's the act of actively killing. So I could go on about this. I'm not sure how much time we have, but
well, let me ask you this: what is the best objection in favor of abortion, in favor of the pro-choice movement? What is the best argument or objection against pro-life? What is the best reason in your mind that you've seen in favor of abortion?
Yeah. So I don't think the bodily autonomy argument is a very good one. I think if you want to argue for abortion, and I don't think this works, but I think if you want to argue for abortion, the best way to do it is to argue that the unborn aren't persons. If they aren't persons, then they don't have moral status.
They don't have a right to life.
They don't have a right to life, in which case we can do whatever we want to them. So I think the best way to argue for abortion is to go that route, not the bodily autonomy route.